How the heretics? Growing up at Jehovah Witness, we were constantly told that we were persecuted, and they would show to Rutherford and 7 others that were put in prison. They were put in prison. This was a conspiracy by the clergy, and they were innocent, 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 and innocent. And there's a 1,000-page verdict that I never read. But I'm going to ask Jeff and Paul, were they really as innocent as they say? Because they read the verdict. Jeff.
Well, the verdict is actually 1,500 pages long, so it's the entire trial transcript. And I like the way that Barbara Anderson describes it. When she read it, and her co-partner, and they were researching for the Proclaimer's book when they were writing that section, they found how conciliatory that Rutherford was to the United States government. He tried to appease the government in the First World War, just like he did with Hitler in the Second World War. So it's very interesting. And a lot of the claims Rutherford made and Watchtower makes about that trial and the Finnish mystery, when we fact-checked the documentation, we ran into some surprising things that we weren't expecting.
Okay. Because the way it was presented for us as Jehovah Witnesses was that we were pacifist, we wrote about peace, and then they said we were not allowed to do it. So being law-abiding, they cut it out of the studies in the scriptures and tried to sell it anyway. But the clergy and the Catholics especially, and the apostates, made them go to prison. And the judge was corrupt. That's what we heard. But that would make it basically a freedom of speech thing, because it is legal to say, like the Iraq War, that I'm against it, it's wrong, you can do that anywhere. So was that true that they were just talking about peace, or was there something more to it?
Well, Paul, you want to go with that first?
First, I would say Jeff and I did a great discussion on neutrality. And as far as making peace, when you find the factories, that was the neutrality discussion, right? When you find what the Bethel workers in Germany were doing.
And Australia.
And in Australia especially, sanctioned under Rutherford, there was nothing peaceful about that. So starting from that point, now going forward to faith in action where we're at, it's a contradictory. And as I said earlier, we had to keep on stopping the film Faith in Action, because, okay, let's stop. This isn't right. This isn't correct. This doesn't match the documentation. So it was a tough discussion. It was a tough edit. There were a lot of facts, 1,500 pages.
What were they doing in Australia?
So in Australia, they were building things to help and assist with the war, like canteens and things like that.
That they wouldn't allow anywhere else.
And in Australia, Rutherford went out to check it out. He gave him his full approval, said everything was good, and left. After Rutherford died, when Norway went out there a few years later, he shut the whole thing down. It was an embarrassment because of what they were doing. You'll find the answer to all of that. That's actually in the 1983 yearbook.
So basically, it's not like they were making cotton and cotton were used to uniform. Right. It was like they were making the zippers to uniform, kind of directly related to equipment.
Things that were directly related to the warfare, like a canteen where you would drink out of water.
Okay.
Right? And I learned about that through the Mike and Kimmy channel.
Yeah, see the discussion, because we took it a step further and did some research on it, and I'd say it was beyond canteens and little knickknacks, so to say, or souvenirs. They contributed. They were using labor. I mean, they were using free labor of the witnesses, who weren't really doing a neutral, voluntary neutrality stance, conscientious objector stance. It's a little deeper than the yearbooks and everything wants to make it appear to be.
But bringing us back to the
so Watchtower wrote about this, that they were doing stuff in Australia, but when Watchtower wrote about it, it was like some crazy brother in Australia had some crazy idea until Watchtower discovered and shut it down. But You're saying
Watchtower knew about that
Yeah,
beforehand.
Rutherford was there, so
Okay.
he didn't shut it down.
Okay,
But if we go back to First World War, how opposed to war were they during the Russell period? They had several that were soldiers in the army in different, nations around the world. They had a conscientious objector stance, but it wasn't what it became until the Rutherford period.
Hmm.
And it was during that Rutherford period when they're actually taken to court, and they're taken to court because in that trial transcript, Rutherford versus the United States, what Rutherford is telling the Watchtower followers to do is, they're writing letters to those already serving in the Army or the Navy or the military services, and basically telling them not to perform their duties.
Hmm. And that's more than just freedom of speech. That's sedition.
Well, that's
Sedition and mutiny.
Yeah,
but
and
the way-
sedition, correct me if I'm wrong, but sedition used to be illegal in America.
No
the
comment.
way though that Faith in Action describes the sedition, they describe it as a trumped up, faked up charge. Well, no,
Mhm.
it was a real charge. They were doing it, and they had the documentation. In the Faith in Action movie, also wants to make it seem like the sedition was the finished mystery, this all important, powerful book. Well, no, as we get into the court cases and Jeff and I get into the discussion, the finished mystery was secondary evidence. It was the yes, it was the letters that they were writing to the soldiers and other stuff that was the primary evidence. So the whole Faith in Action movie takes it like it's, oh, they came against us because we had this big bomb against clergy with the finished mystery. That is not the case at all.
Well, that's interesting because okay, so I just read the Watchtower propaganda and actually used to believe it, but I've been more and more critical with the years. But they sell it like it was the finished mystery, the seventh book of this. But
Yeah,
that's typical Rutherford because basically the finished mystery was when he stole,
Well,
did
we
a
get
car
into
grab.
that too. We get into that too.
So
Not only are we covering
the idea to like, oh, the finished mystery was like what the clergy was crazy about.
Yeah, that's why the discussion ended up so long. We're not only covering the Faith in Action movie. You can't do it without covering other things in it, like the court transcripts, like the finished mystery itself. So we did a good. That's why it's so long. It's going to be It was a long discussion, but it covered the origins of the book. It covered the court. It covered everything. It had to be that long. We tried to make it shorter, but it just couldn't. If we didn't have to stop the film every 30 seconds to a minute, we probably could have done it. But
okay, so my impression as a Jehovah Witness, it was that this was freedom of speech, and it was, but it was not. It was sedition, and then it was about the finished mystery, which put Rutherford in center of the whole universe. But it wasn't the finished mystery. It was the letter writing campaign and stuff like that.
It was the letter writing campaign with those.
I need to know that I'm wrong about.
It's the sedition that is the main primary charges in the trial transcript. The finished mystery is supplementary. It's unessential to what they were really charged with.
Okay. And the sedition was not the finished mystery.
when you say, I wouldn't perform any military service, I would not do it at all, there's a problem, especially during a war.
After you were already joined.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, Watchtower claims it was a clergy conspiracy. That this is why the clergy went after them and got in bed with the government in order to go after Watchtower because of their claims in the finished mystery. But when we tried to fact check that, in none of the newspapers could I find any evidence supporting that whatsoever. Not in the United States, not in Canada. I did find one person that Watchtower mentions that questioned the finished mystery, but he said it never entered my mind to go any further with it. I actually found the newspaper article that Watchtower is quoting, but they're not quoting the whole article, typical of Watchtower.
Of course not.
There is one document in Canada, however, that Dr. Jim Penton has, that one of the clergy members did write to the government in Canada, and they were able to initiate something against Watchtower because of that. But was there a clergy conspiracy? They were all against Watchtower and they went after Watchtower?
And
There's
that
no
even
evidence.
came across as more of an individual, personal individual acting on his own, a church leader, not with the church behind him when you researched it. So
now, Jim Penton mentions that in his book, Jehovah's Witnesses in Canada.
Mm.
But when he wrote the book, he was still a Jehovah's Witness. And he says today that if he would rewrite that book or update that book, he would need to change a lot of things because he was very pro Watchtower at the time he wrote the book.
Yeah. So the whole idea with Jehovah Witnesses being persecuted in 1918, they went to prison.
1918, yeah.
Yeah. So it's really important because if Jehovah Witnesses is what God's one true religion, there must be a point where God said, "This is my favorite printing company." There must be a time, when this is the approved religion. And according to Jehovah Witnesses, it was when Babylon the Great took them into captivity, and then they were liberated. Like in the Bible, when the Israelites were liberated from Egypt and Babylon and stuff like that. So if the whole story is fake, then they were not elected, because there's Jehovah Witnesses believe that Jesus elected Rutherford and 7 other, but there's not 2 witnesses. There's no 2 witnesses to that claim. So if no other fact checks up, they're lying.
But they make this claim in the film that this petition was signed with 70,000 people. And that they wanted to try and get them out of prison because it was an unjust trial. This is Watchtower's words. Well, what the film doesn't mention and what the Proclaimer's book does say is that they did get some signatures, but it was never submitted to the government because they just paid for their bail and got out. It was really that easy. So it wasn't as Watchtower claims. Okay. And they claim that the trial was unfair and illegal. There's no evidence of that either, because you do see in the trial transcript when they said, "This is what you said, this is your sedition, these are the acts of sedition. How do you respond to that?" They were conciliatory and said, "Yeah, we shouldn't have done that," basically. I'm summarizing it, but they were trying to appease the government. Rutherford didn't learn his lesson in World War I. He, again, as I said earlier, he tried to do the same thing with Hitler in World War II.
Well, the thing is that they
was kinder to them. If you take back and look at it, the government, the United States government, was going out of their way to not harm them. So, you can't make that claim. If anything, they got caught in lies that they were doing. Even as we go through in the discussion, one of them perjured themselves. I mean, beyond, even questionable. I mean, it was outright, well, wait, you got caught. And several, if you go through the transcript, that's happening frequently through there, and they're changing their mind. They have to keep asking the same question over and over because they're getting a roundabout answer. Well, that's not what we asked. Here's what we asked. Answer the question. So there's a lot to that. And Faith in Action really turned it into something entirely different, for lack of any better terminology.
They also claim that they were completely exonerated of all the false charges.
Well, that I heard.
Yeah, that they say that exactly in the film, except if you look at what happened, and we got the writ of error. And Watchtower claims in their periodicals, I think it's in the Proclaimer's book, that there are 135 errors, and the judge was corrupt.
Yeah,
well, Judge Manton was indeed corrupt. He got caught, more than a dozen years later, accepting a bribe and a payment to get somebody off on specific charges. And Judge Manton went to prison. They're not proving that he was corrupt while he was there. If you look at the writ of error, it's 130, basically they're counting 135 errors. But remember, most of these errors supposed errors in the transcript, they're the same ones for each of the 8 that are listed there. So they're exaggerating the number by saying this set and this set and this set, but it's really just a few for the whole group, really.
Yeah, and everything. There are errors all the time, but the difference between errors that change the outcome, I don't know how this was. Was it kind of errors that was big errors or just clerical errors?
How many errors did we actually count when it was all said and done?
I don't remember how many errors. It's not exactly that. But what Watchtower was trying to do is say, well, because one of the witnesses perjured themselves, we want the whole case thrown out. Except a witness who perjured himself was a Watchtower witness. It was Hudgins. And he refused to answer the questions. He did not help Watchtower in their case by perjuring himself. And he actually went to prison for that as well.
Oh.
So what the writ of error was, it was basically to say...
A Jehovah Witness perjured himself and went to prison for perjury.
Yes.
Why didn't they tell us that?
That's a very good question.
Do you have other gems like that in your video?
7.5 hours of gems in there. That's why I'm saying, I mean, we're joking, but we literally had to stop all the time. You play it for 2 minutes. Wait, that, and then you check it. That's not what happened. You play 4 minutes, you play 30 seconds. In fact, I think it was even in this discussion, Jeff, when we read a paragraph of something, the whole thing in one paragraph was just like 4 contradictions of their own contradiction in the first place. It was pretty, I can't remember exactly. You know what I'm talking about, Jeff. Yeah. I can't remember the exact instance of it.
Basically, we recorded this, we edited it together, and as we're doing the editing, we kept finding more things. So we went back and recorded more, inserted in. We went back and recorded more and inserted it in, and it just got out of hand. It's just fact-checking the evidence. But this writ of error, back to that trial transcript, basically they were trying to get the entire thing tossed out. What they did is they said, okay, we're going to retry this. Basically, we'll drop it for now. We'll retry this, and we'll come back and relook at it again. Well, they didn't retry it, so it was more like a kind of forget about it. It's okay, forget about it. They weren't exonerated for sure. There's no exoneration, basically. But
okay. We talked about that in detail in the discussion we had.
It's funny because Judge Manton in the Second Circuit Court of Appeals says basically, because a witness comes in and says, I don't remember, then we'd be unable to proceed the trial of any case. That would give the witness or witnesses the power to stop all proceedings. That's the excuse that Watchtower was trying to use to get it thrown out of court. What Rutherford's doing with this prison experience comes to play in 1923 when he writes an article on the sheep and the goats parable. And he looks at the context in Matthew 25, and in the verse it says basically, when did you come and serve me? When I was in prison. And Rutherford says, I was in prison. Basically, I'm summarizing. I was in prison. This is all about me. Therefore, it proves I'm the chosen one, or our splinter group is the chosen organization. And
because he was in prison.
Yeah, because he went to prison. And his entire philosophy of how to interpret the Bible becomes very egocentric from that point forward. Everything from that article forward is basically how it applies to Watchtower during his presidency, proving he's the chosen one.
So in Matthew 24, it was Jesus who said, I was in prison and you didn't come to me. And now he said that's a parable on him. He's basically making himself as Jesus.
Yeah. Now, to be fair, in the article, he says other Bible students went to prison as well. But his main primary focus is how it applies to him. And if you look at how Watchtower's applied that parable throughout the decades since that point, they've centralized it further and further and further till now it's not just all the anointed that means, but just the governing body. That's how it's interpreted now.
Yeah.
We all got in the wrong business. We should have started a religion.
I did start a religion. Just Google the Norwegian goat cult and you'll find it.
A goat cult.
Mm.
Norwegian goat cult?
No, he's a Norwegian hillbilly.
So basically, the Watchtower whitewashed the whole story. It wasn't freedom of speech. It was sedition. It wasn't the Finnish mystery. It was
Sedition and mutiny.
Yeah, it was sedition evidence. The campaign.
Well,
And then they perjured themselves, and it wasn't a conspiracy from the clergy. Because when I pictured this, when we read it over and over again as a kid, I picture like a court case where the court building is surrounded by Catholic snakes. Actually, I was a child, so obviously a little imagination, but they make this picture that it was a very, 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 very unjust court case.
I think we'll answer it this way. We presented it in such a way. Watch it, and you decide based on the facts that are from the actual documentation. Anyone could decide for themselves if the Watchtower is lying or whitewashing it.
We put the documentation on screen, so if there's any question, you can read it yourself and you can fact check the fact checkers.
Okay, so that's your video on your channel. Say the name of your channel.
Watchtower History.
Watchtower History. So if anyone wants to have the long, nerdy version of 1,500 pages of Watchtower whitewashing history, you should go to watch WT History on YouTube and see Jeff and Paul. So thank you very much, and see you in paradise.